It's difficult for people who have not had any experience with sign languages, I think, to understand that when we use speech,
Yes.
we form symbols by the use of air coming through our vocal cords and the position of our tongue and the position of our lips, and that seems to be impossible to think of any other way of forming symbols. But the use of the hands and expression, the location, the movement, the hand shapes is infinitely variable in the same way that the sounds that are produced through the vocal cords. The most significant part of the grammar, which is very different to spoken languages, is the use of expression and the use of facial expression. It is part of the grammar. So where my eyebrows are, if they're raised or they're lowered, and where my head is, if it's forward or back, will change the meaning of a sentence. So any space forward of the body represents future time, and any space behind the body is past tense, and at this point, present tense. So now, tomorrow, yesterday.
If you took signing away from deaf people, what would they lose? How would it affect their knowledge?
The best illustration, I think, is a historical one, and going back to this 100 years of education where sign language was banned, I think is a really good illustration, because often the children would spend a whole day learning how to pronounce the word caterpillar,
Yes,
but having no concept of metamorphosis. So by the use of sign language, and either directly from a teacher who is signing or a hearing teacher who's speaking with the use of interpreters, the lesson becomes one of knowledge and concepts rather than how to pronounce something. So many deaf people who are over the age of 30 grew up with a very limited understanding of the world. They might be able to say things and read, but without the depth of understanding that the younger people do. The more I've learned about language and communication and understanding and the gaining of knowledge, the more I realise how crucial it is for most deaf people. Some deaf people choose not to sign, and that's absolutely fine too. Of course, some deaf people who may be profoundly deaf choose to use the newer technology, such as cochlear implants, video, texting, text phones have really revolutionised people's lives. Email, but definitely video conferences, video Skyping, that sort of thing has really improved people's access. People often ask me, is it international? Is it an international language? And I've often been very surprised to learn that it isn't, and that every country has its own. I explained that even though American Sign Language and New Zealand Sign Language are both English-speaking countries, they are completely different sign languages. I don't understand American Sign Language at all. It has a different. It even has a different alphabet. There is a deaf culture which informs the language and vice versa. But I think when I meet a Spanish deaf person, the mannerisms tend to be more familiar to me from within the deaf community than meeting a Spanish speaking person. Because of the mannerisms, the way that as I mentioned before, the expression is part of the grammar. Deaf people tend to be very direct and very blunt.
Really?
So this is a cultural, one of the cultural aspects that is quite different to spoken. Different things are valued. I think, for example, historically, deaf people have had to come together to socialise. There's been no opportunity to use the telephone, for example.
Oh yes, of course.
So in order to exchange information within the deaf community, it's been imperative that people come together to find out about what's happening in the world.
Oh yeah, they have to be able to see each other.
Have to be able to see each
That's
other,
right.
and historically, in the last up until the 1980s in the Western world, particularly, sign language was banned in education. So as a result of that, often literacy levels were quite low. I'm generalising, of course. There were some deaf people who succeeded very, very well in the education system, despite the barriers that were put in place. But as a general statement, the literacy levels were quite low. So not only were deaf people not able to phone each other, but to get information through the newspapers might be very difficult as well. No opportunity to hear things on the radio. Television was impossible to read because there were no subtitles. So to come together and exchange information and just to socialise, just to be able to communicate with somebody in one's own first language was really... So the coming together of the community and playing together, playing sport together, having deaf theatre, deaf comedy, and valuing certain aspects of the social environment as well, like, for example, light, making sure that a venue is very light so that people can see each other.
So none of this intimacy with candles if you can't actually see each other moving hands.
My first experience when I was learning sign language in 1998, I had my first total immersion weekend.
Immersion weekend, okay.
Up until that point, I'd just been learning, going to one class per week. But at this total immersion weekend, we had a number of deaf people who came along to help the students develop language. And at meal times, there could have been 80 people in the room, all talking. So you can imagine 80 people, 80 hearing people talking would be very noisy, but 80 people who are using sign language is very quiet, except for you can hear the cutlery and the noises of eating. There's a very good model which I can explain to try and illustrate how the deaf community works. There's a core of the deaf community where there needs to be 4 aspects present for people to belong to this core, and that is there needs to be an audiological component. So
an audiological, what does that mean?
So people have to have some kind of hearing loss.
Okay.
There's a political involvement, so people who may be advocating or trying to get some benefit for the deaf community, such as subtitles on television.
Oh yes,
captioning. There needs to be a social component, so people who want to come together to see other deaf people on a regular basis and to exchange that information, and also a linguistic component. So you might have people who are deaf, who work in that political arena, who like to socialise, but who don't really value sign language. So they wouldn't necessarily be seen as part of that core group of people.
Okay.
And often the people who are in that core are the very strong deaf families who have a genetic deafness. So deaf parents with deaf children.
Oh, so the language would truly be passed on as the mother tongue, mother tongue. Again, listen to the vocabulary, listen to the natural metaphors that a hearing person uses.
So thinking about that model then, so I would place myself outside that core because I can't be part of, I don't have all 4 of those elements. I might have 3 of them, but I can never be deaf.